Looking at the state of affairs with local journalism here in Wyoming, Jackson is a bit of an outlier with the strength and size of our press corps. But our ability to cover the issues of the day, our local and county government, and the impact of state and federal policies on our community is never a guarantee. Just take what is happening nationally. The Associated Press was banned from the White House press room for the past few days. Meanwhile, the FCC has initiated investigations into CBS for how it edited a 60-minute interview, and investigations into Comcast's NBC for their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, and into PBS and NPR on their underwriting practices. According to the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker, there were over 300 incidents of violations of press freedom in the United States last year. For example, the Kansas legislature banned reporting from the House floor, and a Colorado Sun reporter was banned from a GOP assembly for what it saw as biased reporting. But the press's role is even more important today. A lack of access to the facts has a negative impact on almost every issue and every facet of society. Disinformation and propaganda rush in. Government is more expensive, less responsive, less effective. The powerful take liberties, and decisions are made with bad information. And decisions become less opaque. The news industry has changed a lot over the last 20 years, and we're going through another seismic shift right now, which we'll be talking a lot about later this evening. KHOL, WyoFile, and the News&Guide. We're working together, all towards the same goal, but we reach slightly different audiences and in different ways. We're not so much competitors these days, we're collaborators. We see our work as complementary. The News&Guide, our local paper of record, is the largest print newsroom in the state, and WyoFile, our statewide investigative outlet, has grown by leaps and bounds, almost doubling its staff in the last few years. For those not familiar with KHOL, you can listen to our daily local newscasts at the top of the hour on weekdays, whether on the FM dial or on your podcast platforms. You can hear our features on Jackson Unpacked on the web at 891khol.org or on our app. I also encourage you to tune in to our reporting that we do with Wyoming Public Radio. We have a 2-year grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, where we share 2 reporters covering how new bills could become laws that impact everyday Wyoming citizens. I'm really proud to call the folks that will be on the stage tonight colleagues. We're lucky to have such talent and care in our community. I'd also like to thank the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board for supporting this event. And now please welcome our Mistress of Ceremonies, none other than the Editor-in-Chief of the Jackson Hole News&Guide, Johanna Love. Johanna came to the Valley in 1997 and has been working at the News&Guide for most of the past 25 years and as Editor-in-Chief for the past 8. Welcome, Johanna.
How's it going? Thank you, Emily and KHOL, for inviting the News&Guide to participate, along with WyoFile, in the 4th year of this look behind the scenes of the stories from journalists who cover our valley. Do we have any News&Guide subscribers here? Woo! Nice. Have Jackson Hole Daily fans in the house? Pick that up all the time? Nice. Is there anybody who didn't know the difference between the News&Guide and Daily? No, okay. We're preaching to the choir here. Okay, is there anybody who's a KHOL member? Yeah. Nice. How about WyoFile newsletter subscribers? Amazing. Yeah, as you can see, we have an incredible amount of journalists covering the important stuff that happens in this valley, as Angus Thurmer, my longtime editor and now a WyoFile reporter, once said that we are the most overcovered small community in the United States. It's really good to see all you there, of you here. As the late, great Bob Dorman would say, it's good to be seen. It is good to be seen, and I hope I speak for all the journalists in the Valley who are proud to be seen doing the important work that we do for you guys. We're proud to be doing the vital work. Tonight's theme is fractures and fusions, the things that divide us and those that bring us together. The stories you're going to hear tonight will all, in some way, explore this topic from a half dozen talented journalists, as well as some of your own stories that you jotted down for us when you came in. There's pens and paper over there if you want to add to the fun, but we have a couple here. Something that tears me apart is losing trivia. Something that makes me feel whole is rotisserie chicken. All right, we want to make sure that we make time for your questions at the end of this, so please hold on to those until the end. Silence your cell phones, and away we go. Our first speaker is Dante Filpula Ankney, who's worked at KHOL 89.1 as a reporter for exactly a year, but he's lived in the Mountain West his entire life. Dante.
Thanks, Johanna. As she said, I've been at KHOL for about a year to the date. But I've been a resident of the Mountain West my entire life. When I talk to my peers, when I talk to my friends, my family about Jackson, the one word that we frequently use is extreme. And extreme for many reasons. Extreme athletes, sure, but also an extreme environment, an extreme landscape, an extreme wildlife, extreme housing crisis, extreme wealth inequality. I don't think one story more clearly illustrates those extremes or our theme tonight of fractures and fusions than the Teton Pass collapse. Quick refresher on the Teton Pass collapse is that it began with cracks in the roadway, first identified by a motorcyclist, unfortunately. And that was on Thursday the 6th, Friday the 7th. This giant mudslide closed the pass. We got both of these in our newscast at KHOL. But as that mudslide was happening, these cracks were getting bigger, they're getting larger. And Saturday morning, the pass collapsed. I've been a journalist a while. I've seen a lot of press releases. The one that said catastrophic failure caught my eye. It was big, and we knew that here at KHOL for sure. We had been covering this area. It doesn't take much to know how important the pass is. But I remember waking up Saturday morning. I was planning to get out into the Bridge of Teton National Forest, do some camping of my own, and saw the press release and was like, there goes this camping trip. Gotta get this done. But I called Emily. We got something up right away, but we got it up on web and then on social media. And the interesting thing about, that's not a way that we usually break news. The interesting thing about KHOL is that we have a daily newscast that runs Monday through Friday and a bi-weekly podcast that houses our features. So when news breaks on a Friday, a Saturday, or a Sunday, we have to figure out a way to get that out to people. And the way that we figured out how to do that is through social media and our web. We got this up within the hour. And that was really important, and something at KHOL that we've found works. The Poynter Institute says about 75% of people get at least some news through social media. We don't think Jackson's any different. But back to this past collapse, we got this story up. I did make it out into the forest, but then was back Sunday really early. And writing the story and thinking about the implications. I knew it was a national story. I knew it had national implications. So pretty quickly, got it to Wyoming Public Radio, and then also pitched NPR. What I found that was interesting, and interesting to me as a journalist for sure, but the difference of what we were focused on and what NPR was focused on. NPR was really focused on the economy, like how is this corridor going to affect the state economy? About a third of tourism dollars from Teton Teton County accounts for about a third of the state's tourism dollars. Here are two scripts that I wrote. One was for KHOL, one was for NPR. Notice that the NPR one is much shorter. NPR has a 24-hour news clock. They are constantly looking for stories and they're constantly airing stuff from around the world. This was 40 seconds on their 24-hour news clock, right? They got like the who, the what, the where, the why. But I included both these scripts because I think what stands out to me is what graph that they cut first. And it might not even come as a big surprise, but there's this last graph in it that is, STAR is providing a commuter service, an alternative route from Driggs to Jackson. For a huge part of our workforce that commutes over the pass. NPR cut that because they don't need that for the national coverage. Somebody in DC doesn't care about our bus system, right? But here at KHOL, like what we were hearing from the community, what we heard was mattering to people, was exactly that. Everybody was concerned about this workforce. So, the rest of the week, I was producing 3 different scripts, right? One for NPR, one for the state, and one for KHOL, one for us here at the station. And the story that I'm most proud of when I look back at this Teton Pass coverage is the story that I did on that alternative bus service that STAR was offering. I drove around the pass, this 2-hour route, 3 hours if you're in a bus, and camped in the back of my car in Teton Canyon, and got up early that morning and hopped on a bus and was like, I need to talk to the people that what I'm hearing from our community is who they want to hear from. Like, how are these people being directly impacted? So I hopped on this bus so early in the morning and wrote it and got these pictures. It was taking 3 hours. This normally 40-minute commute is now 3 hours. And part of that was due to this traffic that you're seeing in the bottom left here. Traffic around Alpine. Rode this bus, and what I heard from most people is that what they were losing more than anything was time. And I thought that was really powerful. But, that's only something a community radio station or a local news outlet would cover, right? Is that the impact here is that people were losing time with their families. They weren't tucking their kids in. They weren't having dinner with their significant others, which might sound, to me it was powerful. And I'm going to play this clip from the story that I wrote around this time that you can hear from these people themselves.
Just means, I don't have dinner with my kids and, maybe I can't get them ready for bed.
I hope this is finished soon because it's tough.
In the short term, it's been manageable. In the long term, it wouldn't be. I'd have to make a change. Just having dinner together, living life. Yeah, we'll still pull it off. It'll be okay. We'll see how long this lasts.
So I'll probably just have to camp. I have some friends I can stay with, and they're very nice for offering their homes to us and to me. But I don't want to disrupt their lives. Time is kind of the most important thing to me. I feel like that's being taken away.
Fast forward 3 weeks, crews have been working around the clock to get this temporary detour open. They pile a bunch of media members, local electeds, they pile us all into a bus and take us up to show us this detour. I think I wrote into my script, actually I know I wrote into my script, that it felt like a bureaucratic field trip. It was like all these local electeds that I always see at county meetings, at town meetings, and we're all sitting on the same aisles like we're going to school. Here's a picture of me there. And yeah, here are some pictures from going up and seeing this detour itself. When we were up there was a lot of, again, a lot of electeds, a lot of significant people within WYDOT, transportation director for the state. That's Andrew Byron, one of our local electeds. But something that I went up there to capture was these crews. In these press releases and these information that I was getting, was these crews were working 12-hour shifts, 24 hours a day for 3 weeks. I thought that was insane, you know? And this is Scott Evans. He owns Evans Construction. They were awarded this about $500,000 contract to do this detour, right? And what he told me, so instead of talking to these electeds up there that I talk to all the time, the poor PIO for WYDOT, I was like, can I talk to like the Scott Evans? She's like, yeah, let me go find him. And brought him over and I talked to him, and what he told me is that, you know, these workers weren't getting time to like decompress. They were working all the time, and that like morale was still high. Like these were members of the community, and they wanted to see this pass open, you know, just as much as everybody else did. One quote that really stood out to me and I think signifies that is this one I'm about to play.
It's like we're torn apart as a family and you want to get that put back together.
And I thought that was so powerful and so clear. And yeah, 3 weeks in, right on schedule, they opened up this detour, reconnecting both sides.
It's like
they actually left a smiley face on the pass within the construction. I thought I had a picture here. I guess I don't. But yeah, you know, they had an ambitious timeline for this complete rebuild of November before the snow hit. That didn't happen. Update, they plan on July now is the new date for a complete rebuild. But yeah, when I look back at this story and think about our theme of fractures and fusion, I'm really happy that our coverage represented this community. I think it's a big testament to the coverage that we have here. KHOL aims to represent this community, and I do believe our coverage did that. Thank you, guys.
If you haven't had enough Teton Pass, we got a little bit more of that for you. Up next, you will see a familiar face. You see him everywhere from the sideline of the football game to the sideline of the dance rehearsal. Bradley Boner has been working at the News and Guide for 20 years, documenting this community. So, Brad.
Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, KHOL, and thank you, Center for the Arts, for hosting this. Really appreciate everyone coming. I have a little bit of just a different perspective than Dante has. I live over in Teton Valley, and so this impacted me, my family, my community firsthand. And that's, I think, a little bit what I would like to talk about. But we'll start with my commute on that Thursday. Just a normal day, really, really nice day, driving over the pass, and traffic slowed down, and all of a sudden we drive by, I kind of see some cars pulled over, and there's this motorcycle accident. And, there's this sort of old photojournalist mantra that the best camera is the one that you have with you, and everyone has a camera now. And so, like, the one that I happened to have really handy was my phone. And so as I slowed down, drove by, I took this picture looked like the guy was all right. It wasn't a very good place to stop, and so I really didn't think anything of it, and I threw my phone back over on the passenger seat of the car. And when I got to the office, I got a notice from WYDOT that said the pass had been closed because of road damage. And it's like, okay, whatever, big deal. And so, I think we got a press release that said that they discovered a crack, and so on my way home, I stopped and took a look at that and was like, oh, okay, they put a little Band-Aid on it and everything's good now, and they said we're going to monitor it. Just not really thinking anything of it, but just kind of like, following things as they happen. So, go to bed, wake up the next morning, and all of a sudden something else happens, and we're like, oh, second time in 2 days, they close the pass because of a mudslide. So I jump on my bike and ride my bike from the closure right at the state line up to this mudslide, and I flew my drone around, and this is kind of it speaks to the relationships that we build with people, because I texted Troy Jarrett, he's the WYDOT foreman. I said, hey, I'm the weirdo down here on the bike, on the other side of this thing, because they were scooping all the mud out of the way. And he said, I just want to let you know what I'm doing. I'm just here taking some photos. And he said, okay, no big deal. And then, we also heard in a press release, I think, that they were also monitoring this crack that was developing just up the road. And the next morning, obviously, we woke up to this weird stuff. And, your alarm bells kind of go off, and you obviously start thinking, bigger picture. And, this was like, obviously a progression. WYDOT started releasing some drone footage and some more photos. It started to get shared, started to get picked up like even that weekend. Really started to get spread, more widespread. And so, we're thinking of this in more local terms, how this is going to impact us. And on that Monday morning, after we did, obviously, I don't want to be too duplicative with what Dante said, but obviously we covered this throughout the weekend on the web, and with constant updates from whatever information we were getting. But Monday morning was sort of the first, like, when kind of reality hit. I got up in the morning just like everybody else, and except instead of driving south of Victor, I was going to head over Pine Creek Pass, so I obviously had to get up about an hour and a half, 2 hours earlier. And before I went down to just kind of see what it looked like, and this was, this is sort of emblematic of what a lot of people in Victor and in Teton Valley community had experienced. It was just sort of this like, road closed sign is this road heading into this like dark unknown, and a lot of us didn't know. Like it was scary. It was for people who live in Teton Valley, like there was just a lot of unknowns. There was a lot of unanswered questions. And so this was sort of like the reality that set in for me. And when I got to the office, after my 2-hour commute, I started making phone calls to Stephanie Harsha, she's the public relations specialist for WYDOT, and I started advocating to get up to the site because I thought that was really important for us to be there. WYDOT had been releasing these photos, but we always put an emphasis on local journalists creating their own pictures instead of relying on handouts, seeing things firsthand, being there so we can, talk about how things smell, what the sounds are like, all that stuff. We just feel it's really important for local journalists and photojournalists to be on the ground and get access to things whenever that's possible. And I additionally got a lot of pushback, and I'll bet I called Stephanie a half a dozen times on that Monday, finally, towards the end of the day, she kind of said, no, we're not going to let you up there. There's safety issues, and we're getting a lot of pressure and a lot of inquiries from national media. And, this was the first in a, pretty long, sustained frustration. But I kind of laid it out to her, and I said, look, I know you're getting a lot of pressure right now. And, one of the things she said, she's like, if we let you up, we're going to have to let everybody up. And I said, first of all, that's not the case. You don't have to do that. There's a thing called a pool photographer where, usually it's the paper of record, or it's the local media, whether that's TV, largest media organization. You let one person up, they, document the situation, they share photos to whoever they want. That's how you mitigate that situation. And the second thing I said was, look, this is like a really big, scary thing right now. And that's the reason you're getting all of these inquiries from national and international media, is because it's a giant gash in the road, and that's like really scary and sexy to these people or these media outlets. And they see that, and they see that they're going to get a lot of clicks on and we're, like, us as the local newspaper, we're going to be following this every single day. We're going to be following it every hour. We're going to be following it every day. We're going to be following it every week. We're going to be following it every month until this thing is fixed. And I guarantee you, whether or not it's fixed in 2 weeks or a month or 3 months or 6 months or at the end of the year, when this thing is finished, you are not going to be inundated by inquiries from national media, because they're not going to care about a fixed road. This is the thing that they're interested in right now. They're not going to care when it's fixed. We're going to be covering this from start to finish because this is our community, and that's what they care about. And to her credit, I think that really resonated with her. She's a former journalist, and she ran out of the flagpole, and we got access. We got periodic access. They let us up there over the next month quite a few times. And over the course of my 20 years at the paper, I don't remember us devoting so many resources to one topic in so many different angles as we did with this past landslide, because it affected so many people. We sent our reporter, now managing editor, down to Alpine, and he went to a gas station. He got a captive audience, right? People are filling up their gas. It's just like you just walk right up to them, and they, captured those stories. We had law enforcement talking about the extra traffic in Snake River Canyon. By the second week, businesses were really feeling the impact, and so not only did we give updates on the slide, we talked about the community reaction, obviously long-term costs. These are stories that I'm showing you right now that were in the that were just in the news and guide. This doesn't even include all the daily stuff. Obviously impacts in Swan Valley and Alpine, and then also over there on the right side, all those poor guys in Wilson were suffering because they were experiencing a lot less traffic, and a lot of people came out of community support and everything. And finally, by the third week, we needed a little bit of levity, so we had seen all these on social media, we had seen all these memes coming out, and so we're just like, let's just collect these and just lighten the load a little bit, because we're all a little bit stressed out, and so we just tried to kind of document every single angle of that, because it just lightened the scene a little bit. Even our sports section got into the mix, and this was a business angle that I really pushed for, that I really liked. This gas station on the left is one that I stop at a lot. It's like the last place that you fill up just south of Victor before you leave and head over the pass, you grab a snack, fill up with gas. And it's usually this hive of activity, and boom, immediately became this ghost town. There's nobody there. I mean, I think they went from they counted them in register, cash register. Every time they opened the cash register, they had 1,200 before the pass collapsed, and they went down to 150 or 200, immediately. In the 2 days after the pass, it was insane. And then conversely, the other gas stations right in the middle of town got all of that traffic. And obviously the one that was south of town didn't get traffic anymore because they were past the turnoff to go over Piney Pass and down to Swan Valley and yada, 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 what they call around the block. So that was like, just like this sort of like micro impact that I really thought was really neat. And then as Dante said, we had this sort of like, big media event, and we call them sort of these like canned media things where they kind of herd you around in a little pack, and they put the people that they want you to talk to in front of you and everything. But finally, the pass was, getting ready to open, and we talked to a lot of those people, obviously. And then, you remember this guy? We finally tracked this guy down, which was great. Like, his story was awesome. The guy who kind of led to the discovery of his crack on Teton Pass. We finally managed to track him down. I can't remember how our reporter was able to get his information. But we landed an interview with him, and it was just sort of like this really neat thing. And then, this picture was from the first morning, the first Monday, the first full Monday that the pass was open after the bypass had opened. These are my peeps driving through the new bypass, and we went to a gas station again because you got to capture audience. It's like you can capture these people, and a lot of people were obviously really ecstatic that the pass was back open again. And I think I would just like to end with, I feel like this photo wraps the whole thing up in this nice little bow, because this was the Friday that the pass opened. It opened on Friday afternoon, so the commuters still had to go around in the morning. But it opened at 11:30 in the morning, and we had heard that it was probably going to open that day, and so I didn't drive around, and I waited at my house in Victor and was kind of checking the webcam, and then I saw some people kind of lining up at the state line where the gate was closed, and so I'm like, I'm gonna go down there and try to get some pictures of people waiting in line and talk to those people who were I want to talk to the guy who was first in line, So, but when I drove up, as I was driving up, the gate comes open, and I was like, whoa, here we go. And it was I'll tell you, after 3 weeks of driving around, it was kind of exhilarating, and there was this feeling of relief. And so when I drove up there, I drove through the bypass, that was cool, and I pull over, and here's Bob Hanna. He was sort of this guy who shepherded our community, was sort of the liaison for WYDOT to our community, and shepherded our community through this whole process. Here's Bob Hanna and one other WYDOT regional guy. No national media, no hordes, nobody else, just this beautiful late June day, me and Bob Hannon waving at people as they come through this bypass. And it's just kind of emblematic of start to finish of what we do as community journalists, is that we're gonna follow the stories that impact our community the most, and we're going to be there. We're going to see it through no matter how long it takes. And I don't know if you can see this guy in the car, but Bob's waving at him, and he gives us a thumbs up, and then as he goes by, Bob turns to me and he says, well, everyone who has driven by and has put up one digit has put up the thumb, and that's a good thing. So that's all I got. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brad. Oh, I messed up the mic. I'm injured with my paw. Okay, here we go. Jasmine Hall, our state government reporter at the News and Guide, has been at the newspaper almost exactly 2 years, and covering the legislature, as you can imagine, especially this year, is a little bit of a stressful proposition. So Jasmine would love to talk to you after this is over if you want to come up and give her any book recommendations so she can help decompress. after the session's over. So Jasmine's going to talk about Wyoming Legislature.
Hey guys, I am Jasmine. I have the jitters. I was joking earlier, I was a theater kid growing up, and you didn't see the audience. They weren't this close to you, you were blinded by the lights, they had a lot of makeup on you, and you were just like, okay, I'll act. But this is different. You guys are here, and I live with you, I spend time with you, and I'm so happy to tell you about my job and my life here. I'm talking about the legislature, and if you don't know, that is the state government's body. They control so many things in our lives, but you also have your county commissioners, your town councilors, and just shout out to everyone who runs for government, especially in a state so small. I feel like it's so difficult to put yourself out there and to represent the people that live in your communities every day. So go into this knowing I love people who run for office. And I love government. I'm a bureaucracy nerd. I have been working for the News&Guide for almost 2 years now, but before that, I lived in Cheyenne for 2 years. After I graduated college at Michigan State in 2021, I was spending the summer working at Home Depot and thinking, what's next? I know I want to be a reporter. I'm not going to sell tools forever, and it's time to get out there. And my brother, who's here in the crowd tonight, Sean, he was working for the Utah Conservation Corps at the time. He has gone on to be a wildland firefighter, and I knew I wanted to be out west. I wanted to be closer to him, and I wanted to explore a place that I'd never been before. I'm from Virginia, I'm from Appalachia, and I recognize living and growing up in a small town how important your newspaper is. The Roanoke Times was the one for me, and I wanted to go do that somewhere else because local journalism, it's going to be cliche, but it is the lifeblood. I get to cover dating stories when I'm tired of dealing with lawmakers, and I get to cover the town council when someone has to go out, and those things are really, really special. You don't get to do that everywhere else. And so after I came out here in 2021 and I worked for Cheyenne for 2 years, I decided, you know what? I want to head up to Jackson. They don't have a state government reporter, and I think they need one. I think we can show how state impacts Teton County. And before I even get into covering government here, I want to talk about why government is so important to me. And that is because we are a small town with long streets here in Wyoming, and the state decides how much your teachers get. They decide how much you might pay for parking downtown. They decide whether your child gets to play a certain sport, and they also get to decide what books you can read at this point. And I think that, and quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that I really hold dear is, our children should learn the general framework of their government, and then they should know where they come in contact with the government, where it touches their daily lives, and where their influence is exerted on the government. It must not be a distant thing, someone else's business, but they must see how every cog in the wheel of a democracy is important and bears its share of responsibility for the smooth running of the entire machine. That is the reason that I love reporting on government, because it can seem invisible sometimes. We're all working jobs, we're all struggling to put food on the table, we're all spending time with our families, and you might not want to go to the meeting for 4 hours on Monday. You might not want to go down to Cheyenne for 2 months and spend 12-hour days reading through policy. And luckily, there are some people here that do. When I came up to Jackson, it was a little bit different because when I was covering state government at the Tribune-Eagle, you covered the entire state. So you were, like Dante said, looking at this really, really wide view. And when I came here, I realized, hey, I've pitched that I'm going to cover Jackson. I'm going to cover Teton County and discover what's important here. People make so many jokes about us not being a part of the state, but in reality, we send so much money to the state. We send lawmakers. Our lobbyists are down there. We want to be a part of the community, and I think we care about everyone else in the state just as much as someone in Laramie or Rock Springs or Casper does. And one of my favorite stories that I got to do last year when I pitched that we should send a state government reporter to Cheyenne for the entire month was I followed around all 4 Teton County delegation members. Senator Dan Dockstader had kind of a busy schedule, so he wasn't able to do it, but Mike Guru, Andrew Byron, Mike Yin, Liz Storer, they were all like, welcome to my life. See how this goes down. And this is Guru at his desk at 6 o'clock in the morning. And something you have to remember is I had to be there too. And so I showed up to Guru's house at 5 a.m. after I pitched the story. Hey, I'm gonna follow you guys all around for a couple days, and I'm gonna look at everything you do. I'm gonna see who you talk to. I'm gonna eat lunch with you. I'm gonna go home with you afterwards. And when I showed up at Guru's house at 5 a.m., he was like, you really got yourself into something. Like, you really showed up. He didn't think I was going to do it. And I was like, no. Like, let's hop in your car. It's time. And I got to see what their lives were like. And I got to show you guys what their lives are like because Guru is eating his favorite omelet that he eats every morning. And there's just so many different lives that they live. And I felt really lucky to tell that story. I'm super close with the delegation. Mike Yin was just texting me about something that's going on the floor right now. And he's like, Jasmine, God, like, it's happening again. But that's not where it started. My first session was 4 years ago, and it was a special session dedicated to the COVID-19 pandemic. The state had decided it was time to stick it to the man. The federal government was telling them too much what to do. We had gotten billions of dollars. They'd already decided, you know what, we'll take our couple million, we'll appropriate it, and then next we'll go after them and say, hey, you can't tell me to get a vaccine, you can't tell me to wear a mask. And wherever you fall along that line, I don't think it matters, it just matters that we had a special session for it. It cost a lot of money, and there were 40 bills introduced to deal with this issue. Only one of them passed, and at the end of it, House Speaker Summers, his bill was the only one left standing, and it didn't really have very much teeth. Some people were upset about that. It said, hey, you can't discriminate, you can't require someone to get a vaccine mandate, you can't require them to get a vaccine, but if you receive federal funding, or if you would lose your federal funding for not getting a vaccine, then this doesn't apply to you. And I think that kind of responsible governing, recognizing what would be lost if you were to send a message back to the federal government, has been lost a little bit, as I've seen it in the past couple of years. The Wyoming Freedom Caucus has gained power, and I think this is where the fracture comes into play. In Wyoming, we have a Republican majority throughout most governments, and especially a supermajority of the state government. And the Freedom Caucus was born in the U.S. Congress in 2015. It was considered the farthest far-right outgrowth of the Tea Party and the Republican Party. They're known for being a no-compromise group. They're devoted to President Donald Trump, and their membership is unknown. They don't list who their members are, but they're very vocal about who they are. And in 2017, a handful of Wyoming lawmakers began forming their own faction here in the legislature, and going from just a handful of members, now they have the majority in the House. And the way that was done was largely in the primaries this year. It's been incremental, but this year they really stepped out. They got a lot of outside money, and they started making endorsement lists. And this here is one of the lists that they sent out. They even endorsed some folks in the Wyoming Senate, even though that's not a caucus. It's just considered allies. And I think that as the Freedom Caucus gains power, you're seeing not only a fracture among the Republicans, but you're also seeing a fracture with the relationship with media. And the Secretary of State, he gave his speech at the beginning of this session this year, and he said it's a golden age. We started out eating pizzas together, and now we are ready to take power, and we're going to mandate on LGBTQ plus issues. We're going to ban abortion. We're going to cut property taxes. We're going to make sure that local law enforcement is taking care of undocumented immigrants in our communities. And I think those are all very interesting ways to look at the legislature. I could come up here and tell you all these different stories about all the different things that they're doing right now. I'm just going to recommend that you get a subscription to the News and Guide. And every week you can see what they're up to. But within that fracture, I like to point out that the House is 56 Republicans, 6 Democrats. Teton County is 3 of those Democrats. So the big split is about, I'd say, 35 Freedom Caucus members, 20-odd House Republican members that are traditional. And then in the Senate, there are technically no Freedom Caucus members, but there are allies. And there's 29 Republicans, 2 Democrats. Mike Guru is one of those Democrats. So access in a new age. I think I have always been drawn to reporting because I'm also curious, and I consider myself pretty fair, and I always want to know what people are thinking. Why did the Freedom Caucus develop? Why are these issues that they're bringing coming to head now? What do they want to do for their communities, and how do they think the national and the state agenda work together? I walked into the Capitol this year, and it felt a lot different. I think everyone knew that, but Maggie Mullen, who's the state government reporter at WyoFile, she and I were talking, we're chatting, like, okay, what's about to happen? Like, are we gonna lose access because we had been discussing in the legislature whether we were gonna not be able to go on the House and Senate floors anymore? And are people gonna wanna talk to us? Do Freedom Caucus members wanna talk to us? Some of them do. I think you have to catch them in the hallways. Something about always having to be there is you gotta catch someone when they're leaving the bathroom, you gotta catch them when they're going to lunch, and you gotta hope that you can build a relationship. I have built really wonderful relationships over my last 4 years, and I have built good relationships even with Freedom Caucus members. There was a moment when former House Speaker Nyman and I last year were talking about Medicaid expansion and how so many people don't have access to health care. And he started crying in the hallway with me because he said he felt sympathy, but he didn't believe that the state should have a hand in giving people health care. And I think as I considered what the next step was, I looked to all the bills that matter to our community, and I said, okay, I need to go find these people. I'm here for 2 weeks, they've sent me back down, and I need to talk to some lawmakers about why they sponsored their bills. And one of the lawmakers that I tried to talk to was Representative Gary Brown. And he says he's not a Freedom Caucus member. They don't have a list, but he votes with all of them. He goes to their press conferences and stands at the front with them. He helps sponsor their bills. I would consider him a member, or at least an ally. And I had gone up to my kid and I said, hey, I think Gary Brown is eating lunch in the hall right there. Do you think you could go in and just ask him if I could just introduce myself and say, hey, and shake a hand? And Mike comes out and his head is, down a little bit, and he's like, I tried my best, but he's not going to talk to you. He says he doesn't trust the media and that he's been burned by a lot of papers during his election cycle. And I thought about pushing for a moment, but I decided I'd catch him at another time. He's probably eating, and I know myself, when I'm hangry, I do not want to talk to him. So I moved on from there. But then I saw the other ways that I was being turned away. I mean, people weren't talking to me in the hallways. If I went up to them and asked them for the quote, I think traditional Republicans would usually, say, oh, okay, walk with me. But most of the time I was being turned away. And at the end of the first week of the session, there was supposed to be a leadership meeting scheduled with House and Senate leadership. It had been a tradition. I'd been doing it all 4 years. And you go into a small room at 7:30 a.m. on Friday, every Friday, and talk about how the week went. By Thursday, I hadn't heard anything. And usually a comms person directs these meetings with you. And I was like, I didn't even think that Haley, the person I knew, was working anymore, and she wasn't. So on Thursday at 6 p.m., I gave a call to House Speaker Nyman, and I said, have you heard about these leadership meetings? We really want to make this happen. And he said that he didn't even know what they were, but he was formerly House Majority Floor Leader, he definitely knew what they were. And he said, you guys can come and show up, but I'm not organizing it. I'm not going to tell the media to come. I'm not going to invite all the partners that we once had. You disperse among yourselves to figure out how you're going to make this happen. I tried to get out the word as much as I could, but you don't have every single person's number, and I'm not a comms person. And when I showed up in the morning, we had our meeting. There was only very few of us. And at the end of it, I was like, hey, thank you for holding this meeting. This is really great. This is really important. We should have access to this information. And he said, yeah, of course, we'll keep this going as long as you tell the truth. And I think that was what shifted it for me. I realized that there's this contingency. I had to tell a version of a story that might not always be true. I'm always curious. I want to find out what both sides are, but sometimes you're fact-checking and it's a little bit uncomfortable. And I've had to tiptoe around relationships before and recognize that if I wanted access, I had to be more thoughtful. So the rest of the week went by. We got lots more press releases, lots less interviews, and I could tell that there was just going to be a huge gap in the relationships that I once had. And then this week, I wrote a story with Charlie about the state taking an aim at our housing programs here and the fact that they threatened to pull all of our state and federal funding if we kept mitigation fees and housing programs alive. And one of the sponsors happened to be Representative Gary Brown, the guy who told me that he didn't want to talk to me the first week of the session. And I had tried to reach out. Again, there wasn't anything going on. Senator Pearson, who sponsored another amendment, wasn't going to talk with us. And we published the story, and the next day we had a Facebook comment from Gary Brown. My question is, does the Jackson Hole News&Guide make it a practice to print articles with doing any research whatsoever? This is typical of liberal brags that print half-truths, yellow journalism, and outright lies. Because if they had done 1 ounce of research, they would have found out that I am not a member of the Freedom Caucus, but real journalism is not what the far-left media practices. My political beliefs have nothing to do with this. I've always considered myself as objective as a reporter as I can be, considering we all bring our own personal experiences. I'm a community member just like you, but once again, I want to be fair and I want to learn what the truth is. And we updated the article to just say he was an ally of the Freedom Caucus. If you don't want to be called a member, but you do all these things, sure. And then Representative Mike Ken responded, "Hi Gary, I tried to introduce you to Jasmine a week or so back, and I believe you refused. If you'd like to still talk to her, I can still introduce you. If you'd rather just name call, then you can continue to do that as well." And I think that is a testament to the relationships that I've built here in Teton County. Not every day are you going to see your representative stand up for you, but I do appreciate when the freedom of the press is upheld, even if it is in the Facebook comments. And I also know that my relationship is beginning to fracture. I think, like Emily said, we're seeing this with President Trump's administration. We're seeing this control of media badges and what people get to report about. If you don't call it the Gulf of America, then you're not going to get to come in. But I'm really, I don't want that fracture to continue. I want to work with everyone. I want to have great sources. And I want us to work together. And so I head back to Cheyenne on Saturday. I'll be there for the last 3 weeks, and hopefully I can get Representative Brown to talk to me in the hallway. But I do have to make sense of this all. I have to make sense of how these relationships are breaking apart, not just with the media, but with Republicans and with Democrats, and even in the voting lines amongst voters. And I hope to continue to do that. So thank you. There is also also been a lot of doom and gloom talk, and I've, talked about the stress of my job, but I also love it. And these are a couple of pictures from over the years. Representative Yin and Bob Hammond, me and Maggie thinking that the budget wasn't going to pass last year, the governor being sworn in, Sophie and I on the steps of the Capitol before I even joined the Jackson Hole News&Guide. She's a former county government reporter. And this year, we have Mo Murphy, we have Ann Sutton, we have Melissa Schinkel. All of you guys make my job possible, and thanks so much. I have a lot of fun, so.
Thanks, Jasmine. We are going to take a quick intermission, but don't go home because there's a lot of great stuff happening after the break. We've got a discussion between three publishers about the funding model for news. We have a discussion about wolf whacking and $3.99 to lighten up and end the night with. So please take a 10-minute break and have a snack, have a drink, have a mingle, and we'll be right back. Got a discussion now about the funding model for news. I'm going to let these three lovely people introduce themselves, and here we go.
Thanks again for coming tonight. I'm Emily, the Executive Director at KHOL.
Hi, good evening. Adam Meyer. I'm the publisher of the News&Guide and the Daily.
Hi, I'm Jared. I'm the Advancement Officer at WyoFile.
And so, because we started off the evening kind of on a bleak note, we're going to continue that a little bit. We're just going to lighten up, I promise. But we all occupy kind of different spaces in the media landscape, and we all have different models for how we operate and where we get our funding, because news is expensive to produce. It's mostly human capital. That's the biggest cost. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how organizations differ and what the challenges are before us today. So I guess let's start with you, Adam. You've been with the News&Guide since the mid-2000s. And how has the funding landscape changed for you?
Thanks, Emily. So we are a privately owned, locally owned news organization. Our CEO, Kevin Olson, and I own the company. And it allows us to be pretty unique in the landscape of publishing today. We've had many decades of local ownership in Jackson, which makes a huge difference to our ability to operate independently and successfully. The majority of our funding model is advertising. We get about 13% of our revenue from subscriptions and single copy sales. That's just for the News&Guide. So that couple dollars at the newsstand or $99 a year for your subscription is a meaningful portion of supporting our work, but the lion's share is coming in from local businesses, nonprofits, display ads, classified and legal ads. It's 87% of our revenue. So over the years, we still publish a free daily, of course, Jackson Hole Daily, 46 years that's been going on. And the News&Guide, of course, is the Teton County newspaper of record. So they have a kind of a unique relationship in that sense because our newsroom provides content, local content for the Jackson Hole Daily. And the News&Guide, of course, is 100% local while we use a lot of AP content in the daily. One thing that is diminishing is local newspapers, as you've read in the trades. A lot of conglomeration and ownership. So again, we're really fortunate to be privately and locally owned. And many of the newspapers in Wyoming are not that way. Casper, Cheyenne, and many of the large markets have been swallowed up by larger publishing companies, Adams Publishing Group, Lee Enterprises, own those big markets. So very different resources in that perspective. So we have been able to, with the support of the community, preserve a large base of advertising. Some of those advertisers are here tonight. Thank you very much for your support. And of course, the subscription base continues to grow. We saw something we didn't really anticipate, but it happened kind of overnight in 2020 when the pandemic overtook our lives for some time. Our digital subscription base surpassed our print subscription base. And that was sort of a whoa moment for us. So now 3,100 digital subscribers was a very different number than when I started, which was 0 digital subscribers. All we had was a printed newspaper subscription at that time. Emily, how about for KHOL? What's going on in the world of funding and revenue for you?
Well, we're relatively new in the media or in the news landscape, I should say. The station started in 2008, but we didn't really build a newsroom until 2019, 2020. And in some ways, we've benefited from the decline in local news around the country because there's been funding opportunities made available to nonprofit newsrooms like ours because of what's happened nationally with the closure of so many newsrooms. So one of the first big grants, ironically, that we got to propel our newsroom was from Facebook. And so that's what enabled us to hire our first reporter and kind of launch us on the path that we're on now. I think people now understand the urgency of what we're doing sort of because of the decline in media, and so it's been easier for us to make our case of why to support local news. And we've been able to, because of the funding from Meta and from local funders from memberships, we've been able to qualify for Corporation for Public Broadcasting funding for the first time. Well, now it's been for almost 5 years we've had it. But that's also in question right now. And so, we've been able to kind of grow because of this poor state of local journalism elsewhere. We've been able to kind of capitalize on that in some ways, in a very small way. We only have 3 people in our newsroom, so it's still very small. But WyoFile also has a similar model, relying on grants and memberships to support your newsroom.
Yeah, exactly. WyoFile is Wyoming's only nonprofit, independent, nonpartisan, public interest news agency. And if our chief executive and editor, Matt Copeland, were here, he'd probably tell you that people give us money and we spend it on journalism. And we have 2 primary revenue streams. We have a large revenue stream, which is individual donors. It makes up probably 60% of our revenue total. And the other primary revenue stream is grants from foundations. We have a secondary revenue stream, which is comprised of underwriting or advertising, our other earned revenue like syndication, as well as income from investments. By the way, we give away our content, give away our stories for free to the Wyoming Press Corps. And last year, Wyoming Press Corps, which is really comprised of print media, print news, republished our content 2,732 times, which is a 50% increase over the year before. We don't give away our stuff to distributors or aggregators like Apple News or Google News. Those folks pay for our content. That's that syndication revenue that I mentioned before. And we also collaborate with radio broadcasters like KHOL, like Wyoming Public Media. If you're a podcast consumer, you might have heard our podcast with Wyoming Public Radio. It's called Cheyenne Roundup. It's a weekly snapshot of the goings-on of the legislature happening right now. And then the final revenue stream is our endowment, which is currently kind of in progress. We're not making any money from the endowment right now, but it's something we've been working on the last couple of years, and excited about that.
We're all in flux a little bit right now. I think maybe KHOL might be potentially experiencing this the most, but we're all experiencing it a little bit in different ways. Adam, could you speak a little bit about sort of what's on the horizon for the News&Guide and small independent publishers?
Yeah, I touched on before the importance of our local advertiser relationships. That's really what makes our mission possible. And one of the challenges we have is the biggest competition for dollars and also for time in many senses of readers is the Alphabet and Meta world. People are spending more and more time on social media, and also some of the ad marketing dollars for local businesses are going there. So, small plug, support the folks who support us. If you see folks advertising in our products, you know that they are valuing local news just as we do. We are fortunate not to be dependent on any sort of grant funding, any state or federal funding. We do work with, of course, the town and county, and other partners that are governmental, and that's an important relationship, but we're not subject to grants or any sort of funding mechanisms that you all are in some of those ways. The public notices statute is a really interesting part of history, and that is a perilous path, right? Because some of the newspapers in Wyoming have seen such declines in their ability to operate. They're relying heavily on wire content or that provided by both the Wyoming News Exchange, which is part of how the newspapers share their information, their stories and photos, but also from WyoFile. So some of these very small markets are struggling to survive. So it'll be interesting to see what happens both with this state statute requiring public notices in a newspaper of record, because that is an important funding source for most small papers. The engagement piece is always a concern, right? How much time do people have in their day to consume media? Does the current landscape change how much time people are going to spend enjoying whatever their favorite TV news talking heads might be, or reading a local paper, or local website, etc. So I do worry about the current landscape driving people away from media. The conglomeration of businesses in our community is also interesting, and you probably don't see as much of a trend in new startups of truly locally owned and operated businesses. Most of them are selling to, for example, we don't have any local banks anymore. They're all owned by national holding companies. Two of those banks say, don't even bring us Jackson Hole dailies because we don't want them here. They don't meet our brand standard. And we say, oh, how wonderful. So that's something we struggled with. You may have seen our newspapers go in and out of Whole Foods a couple times. We battled. We were the only Whole Foods location in the West that does sell a newspaper. I had to educate their team about how people buy newspapers in Jackson and how important it is for them to be able to grab all of their groceries each week. So it's interesting having these mega corporations that are expressly designed so you can't talk to anybody who makes a decision, whether it's about having a paper in their lobby or even just how to start a conversation about marketing. So that's a challenge for us. Finally, I do worry about housing our workforce, and that's a huge challenge. We bring new reporters to town. People become housing insecure at a moment's notice in Jackson. So we're always struggling to make sure we can have our staff be in a comfortable enough place where they can do work and enjoy all the things in Jackson. So that's another thing that concerns me. Emily?
Yeah, I mean, housing is obviously at the top of our concern list as well. In many ways, KHOL is kind of like the farm league for public radio. A lot of our reporters have gone on to Wyoming Public Radio, to the Mountain West News Bureau, to bigger stations. But reporting still needs to be happening here in Jackson, and so we can only do that if we have the dollars to keep raising salaries and try to keep people here. So that's definitely a tricky one. People stay for a year and a half, get that notch on their resume, and then move on. I think for the public, one of the biggest challenges that we have, we're always competing for advertising dollars with the News&Guide, with other outlets, with Buckrell. Radio is an ephemeral medium. You hear a 15-second ad and you're lucky if you catch it because you're in the car. But with a newspaper or physical print materials, you can flip through, you might remember that ad, it affects you a different way. You might rip it out of the paper, put it up on your fridge. Radio, you don't do that, you can't do that. And so getting advertisers and businesses and other nonprofits to support us is often a value proposition. Getting them to understand that they're supporting an institution, they're supporting an idea. It's not just about getting their message out there. It is that, but it's also about supporting the institution of public media in our community. And then I talked about this briefly earlier, but one of the biggest questions for us right now is this FCC investigation into NPR and PBS. And we are not an NPR affiliate. But we do get funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'll explain that just in a little bit. But the investigation into NPR and PBS is really looking at their underwriting practices and how they acknowledge donations from businesses and from donors. And we follow the same practices. So when you hear an advertising message on a public radio station, on KHOL, on Wyoming Public Radio, they all kind of sound the same. They say something like, support for KHOL comes from the Center for the Arts. and then you have a message that's somewhat promotional, but it's not really saying go out and buy that ad or buy that product or come to this event. It's worded a little bit differently. And now the FCC is investigating the ethics behind that and whether it really meets FCC standards. Well, it's been working this way for 50 years. And so if we can't get that money for advertising, that's going to really eat into a significant portion of our budget, because we rely on local businesses and nonprofits for advertising. It's about 25% of our budget. And then the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is a nonprofit that is funded by Congress, gives public radio stations and public television stations funding throughout the country. We finally got funding from them. We qualified in 2020. We've been getting funding since 2021. That funding hugely expanded our resources. We get about 25% of our budget also from CPB funding. And that goes directly back into our newsroom. And if that goes away, which it's quite possible it will, right now we already got our allocation for 2025 in November, thankfully. But we don't know what's going to happen next year. And if that goes away, if there's something that happens with how we can do advertising and underwriting, right there, it's 50% of our budget. And we've grown substantially over the last few years, so what that looks like for our future is really uncertain. So it's kind of a scary time for public media. And then, because we are so new, we've really had to try to figure out who are we in this media landscape and differentiate ourselves from the News and Guide and from WyoFile. We are not the paper or the outlet of record. What we try to do is look at solutions and trends and pull back a little bit. We're not necessarily the ones breaking the news. Sometimes we are, but usually we're not. But we know that we can reach people and meet them where they are. And where they are is often in their cars in this community, which we heard from some of the last presentations. Our news is very digestible, bite-sized. These newscasts are 4 minutes, so one story might only be 1 minute in that 4-minute newscast. A radio feature is probably about 700 words. A print feature, 1,200 to 2,500 words. It's very different. So we're having to synthesize information. It doesn't mean that the reporting still takes the same amount of time. It's just how we're synthesizing that and how we're finding a way to reach our audience is very different. So those are just some of the challenges on our plate. How about for WyoFile?
As I look at the crowd, I think people want to hear Mike Koshmrl talk about wolves, so I'll be brief. One challenge I can think of, I started in November, so I'm still learning the landscape and where the challenges lie. So one such challenge is one that many nonprofit news agencies face throughout our country, and that is changing mindsets around news outlets being a recipient of philanthropy. When folks think about charitable giving, they think about the hospital foundation, they think about the art museum, maybe their alma mater, and we are trying to change that right now. We believe that having access to factual, verifiable information is a fundamental civic good, right along with having firefighters show up when there's an emergency at your house, or the Red Cross ensuring communities are able to recover from disasters, local food banks ensuring that the most vulnerable among us don't go hungry. Having a responsible government is something that we want in our community. We need verifiable, factual information, and you simply can't have the former without the latter. So that's one, battle we're facing right now, and this community and communities around Wyoming have stepped up big to ensure that WyoFile is successful and will continue to be successful. So thank you all for that support, financial, for reading our content, for coming to an event like this. We so appreciate it.
Thank you. And we'll be taking questions for us and from all the journalists afterwards, where we're going to continue the evening now with Mike Koshmrl. Actually, Johanna's going to come back on stage. And then we're going to continue the talks from the journalists. So thank you all.
I just wanted to give you a few little snippets from the audience. These are fun little questions about what people think something that tears me apart is. the post office at Christmas time, the current federal government, the growing divide, donor fatigue, and things that make me feel whole. Chocolate chip cookies, friends, brownies, more friends, running into the friends on the Teton Pass shuttle, and the amazing plethora of journalists in Jackson. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Mike Koshmrl. He worked at the Jackson Hole News&Guide for a decade before going on to WyoFile 3 years ago. He has been covering the wild landscapes of Wyoming. He's been in the woods so long, he's starting to look a little like one of those wild creatures himself. Mike Koshmrl.
Regretfully for y'all, this is the only slide I have, so get used to it. I got an email last weekend from a reader who actually is from Jackson, who took issue of my word choice. He disagreed with my use of the word sport in a story. I was using it to describe an activity. Categorically, he told me that is no sport. I was candid, and I wrote him back, and I told him, that I also personally do not see this thing as a sport, but those who participate in it do, and so what do you call it? All the journalists in this room know that grappling with the correct word choice is something that we do every single day. And I frankly have always been unsure of what to call this thing that people do. If it's not abundantly clear from the slide that you're going to be looking at for the next 10 minutes, the activity is running over coyotes and other animals with snowmobiles. Unequivocally, it is a form of recreation in some parts of Wyoming. Participants think of it as hunting. The livestock industry sees it as a predator control tactic. Although it's acceptable in some circles, my sense is that the public at large perceives this activity as brutal and simply unfair to the animals being run to exhaustion and crippled by 500-pound machines. Polling tells us that most people, including in Wyoming, think it should be illegal. 6 years ago, Teton County's representation in the Wyoming Legislature tried to make it illegal. I was a reporter then at the Jackson Hole News&Guide, tracking what became of the effort. The Mikes, to this day, your representative Mike Yin and Senator Mike Guru brought a bill that would have made it animal cruelty to strike animals with snowmobiles, including predators. The list of species that it's currently legal to do that to is fairly short. I've heard of it happening primarily with coyotes, but also to jackrabbits, foxes, and wolves. The bill was kept in the drawer, as they say, which means it never got introduced. Mike Yin tried again the following summer, but he was rebuffed by a legislative committee that showed little interest in sponsoring a bill. At the time, a state senator from Laramie scolded bill proponents for grandstanding what he put as one idiot who put a video on YouTube. Perhaps that senator's suggestion that running over animals with snowmobiles is a rarity was wishful thinking, or maybe he preferred to look the other way. It's hard to say, I haven't asked him, but we do know now that it's a much more commonplace activity. I've actually interviewed a guy who really enjoys running over animals with snowmobiles. And that wasn't because the person came to me. I just wanted to give you all kind of a quick glimpse into the legwork that sometimes we do as reporters to locate sources, to talk about things that are hard to talk about or people don't want their name attached to. So in this instance, this was the end of last April, and it was the night before they do the antler rush onto the National Elk Refuge. And I was in town and went over to the fairgrounds. I just was interviewing people about the antler rush, getting photos, blah, blah, blah. It was a month after the Cody Roberts incident occurred, and I just was kind of like taking the temperature, trying to get a sense of what people, because it attracts people from around Wyoming, just trying to get a sense, like, what do these people think of what happened? And so I just got to talking with the group. There was a guy from Pinedale, which is where I live. There was a guy from Evanston, a guy from Riverton, and the conversation turned to running over animals with snowmobiles, which is how Cody acquired that wolf. And the guys were perfectly friendly with me in the interaction, but they definitely were defensive about that activity. It was very evident that they partook in it. But it was an off-the-record conversation. I guess one caveat is one of the guys in the group had replaced my windshield before. So months later, I was like really trying to find someone who would talk to me about running over coyotes with snowmobiles. And I went over to this windshield shop and I was like, hey dude, so I don't know if you want to, put your name on this, but would you get an interview? And he did not, but he said, one of the guys that was in that group, my friend Don, I bet he'd talk to you. And Don did talk to me. And that was the lead of the story. It was pretty painstaking to get a hold of him, but it worked out for the purpose of providing a narrative and giving people a glimpse into what people do there. So why was I writing over animals with snowmobiles? This was in the summertime. Well, the short of it was just Cody Roberts, that incident. In my 15 years as a reporter, I've never seen something blow up quite like that. The appetite for information about what happened was insatiable. In some regards, what Cody Roberts did was unifying, I think. Everybody from the governor down the line condemned what occurred. I'm of the opinion, though, that on balance, the incident caused more fracturing than it brought people together. There's really no overstating the scope of how it blew up and the online haranguing that occurred in the aftermath. Wyoming Public Radio's Caitlin Tan reported that the wrong Cody Roberts, a guy who lives in Thane, received thousands of messages, including death threats from Ireland, Russia, Japan, and Australia, and that was the wrong guy. Sublette County, where I live, was absolutely inundated with threats. So were Game and Fish offices all around the state. Billy Arnold, who you will hear from next, reported that the similar-sounding Wyoming Gaming Commission, which regulates gambling, received threats. The outrage was really intense, and how it was expressed was really ugly. As journalists, we cannot control what people do with the information in our stories. But I would like y'all to know that we do think about it. In the case of Cody Roberts and that fiasco, the ugliness and the harassment caused me to push back on my editors about writing one story in particular. I thought that the harm outweighed the benefits, and after discussing it, they agreed with me. In my opinion, Wyoming officials' response to the wolf incident also inflamed the outrage and deepened divides. For starters, state officials provided almost no official information, creating an environment where virtually anything reporters like myself were able to dig up qualified as news. The policy response also exacerbated tensions. A quasi-legislative treatment of predators working group was created, and out of it came a bill. Under livestock lobby pressure, our governor, Mark Gordon, advised that group to not, quote, interfere with the ability to manage predators, which meant, in the context of this working group, keep it legal to run over animals with snowmobiles. Lawmakers landed on language explicitly codifying the legality of doing it. You just had to kill the animals quick. People were aghast and irate. This legislative session, that bill went nowhere, just like Yin and Gru's attempt at a prohibition 6 years ago. But Cody Roberts' actions are setting up to leave a legacy in Wyoming statute. Another Teton County representative, Andrew Byron, brought a bill that stiffens penalties for tormenting or torturing any wildlife, including predators that are like possessed, actually. The proposal notably does not prohibit running over animals with snowmobiles, and so that would remain legal, at least as that bill is currently constructed. It's still going through the process, but is moving quite fast through. But another bill brought this legislative session did seek to make snowmobiling over animals illegal, at least on public land. It did not survive in a tight vote, but nevertheless, in my opinion, there's reason to believe that there's more support than ever before for ending the practice of running over animals with snowmobiles because of what happened a year ago in Daniel. Remember that 6 years ago, it was 2 Teton County Democrats that signed their names to the bill. Mike Yin, who was then a freshman, tried for Republican co-sponsors, but he couldn't get any takers. No one was interested. This year's bill sponsor, it's actually another guy named Mike Schmid, and he does not fit the same mold whatsoever. 4 years ago, Mike was in Washington, D.C., attending an infamous rally that ended at the U.S. Capitol building. He's an oil and gas industry businessman, a MAGA Republican, and he is openly skeptical of science. Mike's also the representative for the legislative district where Cody Roberts lives, and he's a very outspoken guy. He's just not one to kind of fall in line with something that is at odds with his convictions. He also votes with the Freedom Caucus all the time, but he doesn't consider himself a member. So those traits of Mike 4 years ago, it led to him being removed from his appointed position at the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. He would just cross the rest of the commission because that's Mike. But those same traits led Mike to bring this bill. At the risk of making blanket judgments about my audience, Mike's convictions about running over animals with snowmobiles are probably pretty similar to yours. It disgusts him. He told me last week, as an avid hunter, I hate what this says about something I love so much. Mike Schmid also told me he plans to try again at prohibiting the activity that I still struggle to describe as a reporter. Who knows what the future holds, but one path forward is that a Sublette County man's poor choices unites some awfully strange bedfellows and creates a Wyoming where people no longer run over animals for their recreation. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mike. Moving it right along, Billy Arnold has recently ascended to the managing editor role at the Jackson Hole News&Guide. We're very sad to see Rebecca Huntington move along to WyoFile, but they're very lucky, and I'm excited for her new role there as collaborations editor. Billy, in addition to journalisting, stays busy as a bass player for Out of Shorts. So if anybody is busy, is not busy tomorrow night, they've got a Valentine's gig at the Bird Hotel. Billy.
How's it going, everybody? That's embarrassing. But yeah, I'm in a cover band. So yeah, that's also a thing. So I'm Billy Arnold. I'm the environmental reporter here. And honestly, I just want to say before I even start talking about what I'm going to talk about, I owe a lot of what I'm talking about to Mike Koshmrl over there for writing about $3.99 for 10 years before I even got here. I got to do it for 3, and for a year and a half, 2.5 of those, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. So kudos to Kosh for setting the groundwork for me. But yeah, so basically I wanted to talk about my relationship with $3.99 and how that developed over the years. I think there's been a lot of reporters at the News&Guide, other outlets throughout the state that have spent time writing about this bear. And I think everyone in this room knows who she is, but if you don't, she's the most famous bear in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, if not year. She raised her cubs along the side of the road in Grand Teton National Park. But when I first got to the News and Guide, I couldn't care less about her. And I didn't really care that much about bears at all. And I came here and I saw this community, and I thought it was a really interesting community for a lot of reasons. Contrast, we can talk about wealth inequality, we can talk about housing crises, we can talk about the disparities between the white and Latino population. You can go on and on and on. And I saw all that and I was like, this is all fascinating. And I was like, why are we spending so much time writing about bears? And that was until I encountered one, which happened, my first summer that I got here. I would do this thing, I would go to like Ski Fit in the afternoon, how original, or in the morning, and then I would come into work, and then I would like set up a little bit of what I was working on for the day, and then I would go walk across the street to Albertsons, get a box of cereal, and then come back, or another snack, whatever it was that day. And this day, I was walking through the courtyard behind the building that's between the News and Guide and the grocery store. And there's usually 3 rocks in the courtyard. And as I was walking through that day, the 4th rock moved. And I was like, whoa, that's wild. And I backed up, and it was this bear. And I just love this photo because Teton Media Works is the name for a parent company, and it captures the whole thing. I think Brad took this, maybe it was Kat, who's right back there. And this happened, I slacked our whole newsroom, and I was like, oh my God, guys, there's a bear in the courtyard, it's a big bear. And Kosh at the time, Kosh was an environmental reporter, he called Game and Fish, he was like, hey, by the way, there's a bear in the courtyard, and it became this whole scene. And just for reference, this is who I was at the time. Things have changed. This is Brad's favorite photo of me. Anytime there's an awards contest, this is what goes up on screen. But I had no idea what I was doing. But I got to see something pretty cool, which was Kosh turned this event that I had been part of into an environmental story. And this story went wild on the website. And I was like, that's weird. All these stories I'm writing about housing and arts and entertainment, nobody cares about these, but they care about this bear. And also, I just want to point out, in that story, Kosh referred to me as a ponytailed scribe. But if you look at him, how the tables have turned. So, like I said, that was my first experience, seeing a bear kind of bring people together and get, I think 15, probably 20,000 people reading a story about some young, dumb kids' interaction with one. But so, at the time, I was arts entertainment editor. I was writing, about Metal Fest in Moran from the arts entertainment side. And then I became the county government reporter, and my job became, harassing county officials and giving them a hard time. But the first time that I ever saw 399, it was also the only time I ever saw 399. It was probably 3 months into my job, my tenure as environmental reporter, and it happened less than a quarter mile from where I lived. And this is the picture that I took. It was also incidentally the first time when I really started taking pictures for the paper. But to this day, I have no idea who's who in this picture, but it's 399 and her 4 cubs, what are known as the quad. And I was standing there at this assignment, this bear jam, which was happening on the side of Moose Wilson Road, right on the Snake River Ranch. And I was looking at the bears, and I was like, wow, it's kind of amazing. I'm getting to watch these bears just be bears. But then I started to look around and see what was going on. And I started even from that first day to see the broader story. Here's just another example of a picture I took that day. Just the bear jam, you've got law enforcement, you've got people running across the road. This became a fracas really fast. And going on, this is actually one of my favorite pictures I've taken at the News and Guide. It was one of my first. And I believe this girl here was maybe 10 years old, visiting from Alabama, and just so stoked to see this bear. And even more stoked to see this bear, knowing that she was the most famous bear in the world. And so I was looking at these bears, and then I just turned around and I started looking at the people. And that's really how I've thought about covering 399 over the years. She as a bear is really interesting, but this phenomenon of $3.99, of humans becoming obsessed with this thing that is not themselves, has always been really interesting to me. And I think people do it with dogs, people do it with their cats, but I think people love $3.99 way more than they love their pets. And it's been a really interesting thing to watch. But so this is my first interaction with her, my only interaction with her. And then I just started writing about her more. This is the first time she emerged, and the thing about writing about bears is, they're big. They can kill you. They have killed people. They can attack you, but people also love them, and it's weird and it's funny. So I gave myself a little bit of levity and gave myself some room to have fun. And this is my favorite lead I've ever written. This was when $3.99 emerged from the den on Easter Day. And, come on. I wrote this lead, and I immediately got a call from Dan Thompson, who is the large carnivore supervisor for the Game and Fish Department. And that was the first time I got berated by Dan. And he was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "You're making her a deity." I'm like, "Come on, let me have it." And he did. And so I had fun with it. I really enjoyed doing it. And I wanted to take a step back and be like, okay, this is a ridiculous thing that I'm covering, but it matters to so many people. And how do I straddle that line? And in terms of the seriousness of it, $3.99 really brought people together in a way that I never saw another animal do. And I think you probably remember this from 2018, those of you who are in the Valley. This is when grizzlies were delisted the last time, another maybe in the future. But when that happened, Wyoming went forward and authorized a grizzly hunt. And people didn't like that in Teton County. Wildlife advocates in Teton County and elsewhere in the state, people were stoked to be able to go hunt a grizzly bear. But when they put out these tags, Tom Angelson, who's this guy here, you probably all know who he is, and a bunch of other people put in, and they were all trying to get hunting tags to try and get a hunting tag and then pull it out of the pool, not shoot a grizzly bear, and and then they'd shoot him with the camera. So in this moment, I saw her really inspire activism. And I guess I didn't, but Kosh did, and he wrote about it, and then I thought about it a lot afterwards. I also saw people develop really strong personal relationships with her, and those were one-way relationships, to be clear. Though some people will claim that when they walk along the park road, $3.99 can smell them and behaves differently. That's never been proven. I kind of doubt it, but who knows? But long story short, anything but ridiculous. This is Greg Balvin and Sandy Mel. They're two of the most die-hard $3.99 watchers there are. They're retired, lived out in Alpine, and in the spring will come up, live in the camp in the park, and just go out and look for her every day. And I asked Sandy why one time, and why she had such a personal connection to $3.99. And her story really impacted me and stuck with me. And she said, I'm a mother, $3.99 is a mother, and I found all these places in our lives where we intersect. And one of them in particular that she talked about was a year one of $3.99's cubs got hit and killed by a car. Sandy also lost one of her kids. And she said she found watching this bear go through the process of grieving, which people will tell you was very public, happened along the side of the road in Grand Teton National Park, gave her a lot of solace, and gave her built this connection between her and the bear. And I thought that was really something, and it stuck with me forever. And I was like, this isn't just some ridiculous thing. For people, this means a lot, and there's a lot to it. And then, on the other side, you have the advocates, you have the people with a personal relationship, and then you have wildlife managers. And I have talked to some of the most hired wildlife managers, and they're like, yes, $3.99 has made us make decisions differently. Hillary Cooley, who is the grizzly bear recovery for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, said at a public meeting that managing $3.99 was the most difficult thing in her career. But I wanted specifically to point to this thing that Game and Fish proposed in 2018 that I've always found really interesting. So when they were going to do a hunt, they basically exempted this small area east of the park from hunting. and that was designed to protect celebrity bears from hunters' rifles. And I thought it was really interesting. Like, I think there's a lot of focus on the trash cans in Teton County, which is undoubtedly 399's like policy legacy. But this one, if you like talking to Game and Fish, they did that explicitly because they knew 399 went through that area, and they did not want to deal with the headache of someone shooting her. Which brings us to 399 dying, and that happened this fall. And I will say, as a journalist, like I think I looked in, before I came up here, I've written thousands of stories for the News&Guide, and there are people that will text me when I write a good story, people that send me hate mail when I write a bad story, or a story they don't like. But my grandma texts me almost every time I write a story. And so this is her. That's her right there, that's my Uncle Russ. And when 399 died, my grandma lives in Connecticut, and she followed her in and out. Every story I wrote about 399 she wanted to read. And when she died, she texted me immediately. This is Wednesday, October 23rd at 2:18 p.m., which is maybe an hour and a half after we published our first story. And she said, "Such sad news about 399. I find it hard to believe, so sad." And then, we texted back and forth a little bit. And then she said, "Amazing how sad you can feel over a bear. Usually it is trying to get away from them. Now who are people going to follow? And I thought that was like a real sweet text, and it really kind of encapsulated so much of what people felt about this bear. They got to see bears do bear things for the first time in Grand Teton National Park, and they got to put their own lives onto those bears, and they got to be inspired by them. And then people as far away as Connecticut, who had never seen a grizzly bear in their lives, followed what 399 did. So when she died, now to get into the journalism part of it, we went buck wild at the News&Guide, and this is the headline from our first story that ran the Daily the day after. We took over basically the first weekly paper after she died. We wrote this story, this big obituary for her that spread, I think, across 3 pages, and usually when a notable person in the community dies, they'll get 1, maybe 2. She got 3. We had our reporters out all over town. It was kind of like the Teton Pass thing, just covering the way. People were mourning her because there were funeral services. There were bear funeral services. I went to definitely 1, if not 2, potentially 3. And then we also tried to look at the policy stuff, and this was a really interesting angle that I want to credit Chris Colligan for. 399 was obviously hit and killed on the side of a road, on the side of the Snake River Canyon. And I called Chris Colligan about that because people were asking me about wildlife crossings, and he was like, "Well, actually, and I came to it, as a reporter did, skeptically. And I asked, why wasn't there, I saw in the Teton County master plan that a wildlife crossing had been planned for that area. And I was like, why wasn't it never built? And he was like, well, it's low priority, and I actually want to point you to something else interesting. But if you look at all of the places she's been seen in the last 4 or 5 years, down south of Grand Teton National Park, you'll see that many of those places are places where we are planning wildlife crossings in the future. I thought that was really interesting. So, not her legacy, but her showing us where animals are moving. And then, 399, covering her was not all roses and fun bear stories all the time. Like I said, wildlife managers had a particularly hard time dealing with her, and one of the things was the public scrutiny. And so this here was a story that I wrote after she died, which was about what happened in her final hours and how his carcass was managed on the side of the road. And I think even in wildlife stories like this, as Mike just did a really good job of laying out, there can be a lot of accountability journalism, asking the questions, and it was an interesting story. You can read it, and it says a lot about wildlife management, how difficult it was to manage a bear like 399. And who knew what when? Which is one of the questions we're always asking as journalists. But yeah, so through all of that, we did a special section for her. I think this is one of the most maybe amazing photos of a bear I've seen. It was really cool to have that printed in a full poster print on the front of the paper. But like long and short of it, and I'm actually going to read two things. One is just to like show you how like sometimes we think about things as journalists. When I came into the job 3-4 years ago, I got the opportunity to interview Martha Williams, who's the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that's a pretty rare opportunity, you don't get that all the time. And it was 2021, and I had no idea what Martha Williams did, but I knew about 399. And I asked her this question, I was like, what do we do? Like, there's this bear that's coming south of Jackson Hole, or south of Grand Teton National Park. She's causing problems, and it's really hard for wildlife managers, like how do we get our heads around it? And I was like, and I asked her, like, what do we do about a problem like 399? And she said in response, I don't know that I'd call 399 a problem. 399 is a gift in a way. She's pushed us to be more creative and probably work in ways that we never thought we would. I say that honestly. I think we've all learned a lot from 399. And at the time, me being the cynical journalist that I am, I knew that 399 would die. And I filed that recording away, and I saved it for 3 years, waiting for her obituary, because I thought, I was like, I'm not going to waste that quote. And the reason I did that is because of something that I think I articulated in a couple of newsletters, and I hope to articulate here tonight, which is basically that there are a million other things that we can write about as journalists, and there are a million sad things for us to write about, a million difficult things. But when you do have a figure or a symbol like 399, something that causes people to care about something outside of themselves, I think it's worth celebrating, and I think it's worth documenting. And I think 399 was one of the most potent symbols that the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem has had. I don't know if there will be another one like her, and I think in that way she'll be missed. So thank you all very much.
But I want to do a quick Q&A and call all the journalists up to the stage.
Hello. Oh, so in the beginning you talked about collaboration and how you're all collaborating now, and that's kind of the way forward. Can you give an example of that and how it differs from the way you did things before? Like this whole idea that you talked about, Emily, that you're not in competition with each other anymore. You're sort of in a collaborative spirit as journalists.
Is it? Okay, it's on. Well, I think one example of this is my relationship with WyoFile. Not only do I get to call those journalists at that publication some of my best friends, but I go down and live with them during the session. So we collaborate resources. It would cost a lot for us to rent out an entire Airbnb for me for a month or 2 months. And by sharing that cost, it helps out. But also Maggie Mullen, who's the state government reporter at WyoFile, I have never viewed her as a competitor. She is so intelligent, so thoughtful, and she's also a woman in journalism. And so I think taking all those things and learning from each other and asking each other questions about policy, asking each other what happened in the most recent meeting, did you get the link for the press conference? All those things are ways that I don't see her as a competitor, and it's one of the best things in life is to get to work with such talented people.
To be clear, I feel like Billy and I always try to scoop each other. We're not necessarily totally collaborative. I mean, we do like throw bones to each other and say, hey, you should cover this. That's happened, but yeah. So it's not like that's gone away entirely. One kind of concrete example that I could point out, I don't know a ton about it, but WyoFile this year coordinated with several newspapers in Wyoming on how to cover the legislature to like, rather than have 3 reporters covering the same thing, there's so much shit happening all the time, would like to coordinate just spreading it out. And so that way, basically we can keep people better informed because there's just not that many people covering. There's literally 24 legislative committee hearings every day, and 500, 600, 700 bills. I mean, we can't do it all. And so that is like a really kind of just concrete way that we collaborate. And yeah.
Yeah, I'd 100% echo what Mike said. I absolutely view Mike as a competitor and WyoFile as a competitor, but I think that's really healthy, and I think that's what makes journalism really valuable. And I think what's like interesting is thinking about going forward. Like I think some of the best reporting that I've seen has been collaborations. I've pointed on your 30-year Wolf reintroduction story, which Mike just did with Amanda Eggert from the Montana Free Press. And so I think on the one hand, while, yeah, I'm going to try and scoop Mike every day I can and usually get scooped by Mike, like I think there are also places where people can collaborate, and I think it's usually longer term stories and like more creative kind of big picture stories, and I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, as far as collaboration goes for KHOL, I mean, we don't have a representative from them today, but we collaborate with Wyoming Public Radio on a daily basis. All the stories that we do, they have the option to air. We air a lot of their stories. And by doing so, we get more listenership for the stuff that we are producing.
To the extent that a lot of repertorial funding is passes through Cowboy State Daily, they have an unusual funding model from what I understand. There's a benefactor behind them, but on a repertorial level, is their work voided, or are they excluded from this event? And for what reasons?
I would say that the Cowboy State Daily it brands itself as a statewide news outlet, but it is, I think that you can read it and notice that they phrase things a certain way, they ask questions a certain way, they interview certain sources and don't interview others, and it really appears to me that they have a political bent and a slant to the work that they do. I think, Emily could answer why they're not invited to participate here tonight. That would be a question for her.
I think some of the reasons they're not invited tonight are exactly what you said. We're different. We see ourselves as adhering to a different standard of ethics in our reporting. And I think Johanna actually has the ethics code from the Society of Professional Journalists here tonight. And we could probably go through some of those Cowboy State Daily articles and find a handful of violations of this code. But I guess another reason is really it's about the outlets that we're collaborating with. We didn't invite, every newspaper in the state. We didn't also invite Wyoming Public Radio. Mostly that's just because we're kind of covering that side of it. We view this evening as a way to feature audio, print, and digital publications. And we each represent those three buckets.
And one thing that I'll add to that is, I think in the long history of journalism, there are always outlets with different slants, different takes on things. You can look at a number of papers that are called the Press Democrat or something that were run by literally the Democratic Party at back in the day. Not so much anymore. Journalism has evolved. So there's an interesting history, journalism history, I think, piece there. But the piece that I would say goes back to the question that was just asked about competition. Regardless of how we feel about other outlets, we are competing with them for eyes. And so I think they are a outlet that I look to every day to see, okay, well, how are they covering something? How are they covering this thing? What does that look like? So I think they inform our coverage in that way. So they're not disregarded. They're a very legitimate and potent player in the state.
questions?
Okay, sounds like everybody's ready to go home and get some beauty rest so you can hit the POW in the morning. If you can't stay for another drink, you want to mingle, you want to talk one-on-one with journalists, we would welcome that. We'd love to keep the conversation flowing. We always welcome letters to the editor. And tips, if you see something, say something. Call us, email us anytime.
No, email us.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Again, thank you so much for helping us celebrate the tradition of journalism in Jackson Hole.